Good evening. I'm Marilyn Cargill, Vice President for Financial Aid Services at VSAC, and I'd like to welcome you to VSAC Shows You How. Tonight, we are talking about how to choose education loans. Most families will need to borrow to help pay for education and training beyond high school. Selecting the right loan for you or your student is critical to the long-term success of your student. We currently have some poll questions on the screen that will help our presenters tailor their remarks to what you need. Please go ahead and answer those questions if you haven't already. Tonight's experts will talk with you about a number of topics concerning loans, including the different loans that are available, how interest impacts your repayment amounts, how to find and apply for loans, and what to do if the loan you thought you were being offered isn't what you are actually offered once you start applying. One of the best reasons to join a live webinar is to ask questions of the experts. To raise questions from the Zoom presentation, you can type your questions into the Q&A section, and I'll be reading those out to our presenters this evening. If you're watching from the Facebook platform, just type your question into the comments. We also plan to have some time at the end of the presentation for any additional questions that you might have. Let's get started by meeting tonight's presenters. Deb Lessor is the manager in charge of VSAC's Loan Origination Department, where she has been helping Vermont families pay for college for over 35 years. Deborah is also the mom of 5 college students, so she has experience both professionally and personally in what many of you are going through right now. Deborah is also a St. Mike's alum, so she's very familiar with our great Vermont schools. Deborah's going to explain the basics of borrowing student loans. Our second presenter tonight is Greg Davis. Greg serves as the Director of Financial Aid at Champlain College and is a past president of the Vermont Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. Greg has been working in financial aid for over 20 years at 3 different institutions and has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to counseling families concerning their unique circumstances. And as the father of a 2021 high school graduate, he has now seen this process from the parent view. Greg and Deborah, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. And before we get to our slides, can we see the results of tonight's poll questions? All right, so we have some students and parents, and we have a little bit of student and parent together, but mostly parents, which is not surprising on the topic of loans. The vast majority of these folks have received their financial award letter, which is great. And Greg certainly is going to talk you through that a little bit. And then about 2/3 of the folks with us tonight have received their fall bill statement. So that also is good to know, because as those bills come in, that's frequently when we first understand what we really need to do in order for borrowing. So it's until you get the award letter, you really don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about borrowing. Okay, we're going to run this session in 2 parts. Deb will start by exploring the loan options, how to compare and choose a loan, how does interest really impact borrowing and repayment, and ways to minimize the impact of borrowing long term. Greg will then walk us through a counseling session, which will look at how to determine how much you need to borrow, how to prioritize your aid, and tips to keep in mind when you're thinking about student loans. One thing that you'll hear more than once tonight is the importance of accessing all of the free money that you qualify for. Every Vermont family should start the process of looking for money for college by filling out the FAFSA and the Vermont grant application. The very first thing that you want to see is if you are eligible for money that doesn't have to be earned or paid back. These grants and scholarships can come from your school, your state, private donors, and I'm sure Greg will talk more about that when we go through our counseling session. So let's start with what you need to know before you borrow. Deb, can you explain the loan types that exist? And is there an order that students and families should consider those loans in?
Yes, absolutely. There are two broad categories of education loans. We have the federal education loans and the non-federal education loans. And that seems simple to just split those apart like that, but here goes the complications. The federal education loans are from the Department of Education, and they typically appear on your award letter as a student federal direct loan and a federal direct plus loan for parents. You apply for those loans through the school. The school will help you through that process by sending you emails and links to places that you need to go to sign the credit agreement, the promissory note, for example. For the student federal direct loan, that one should always be accepted first. And the reason for that is the interest rates typically are best on those loans compared to the other ones. The federal direct student loans are broken into two parts. The subsidized part, and those are for students who have greater financial need. And the interest does not accrue while the student is in school or in periods of deferment. The interest is paid on your behalf by the federal government during those periods of time. The unsubsidized loan is also for students who need to borrow. The interest does accrue even though you're in school, but there's no payment that's required on those loans at that time. There's also the federal direct plus loan, and those are for parents of undergraduate students. Those loans do require a credit check of the parent. And the most you can borrow on that loan is the cost to attend the school, which is your tuition fees, room, board, books, whatever, minus the other financial aid that you're already receiving, maybe some gift aid. And that equals the maximum amount that the parent can borrow. The other type of loans is the non-federal education loans, and they're often called the alternative loans or the private loans. And they have all kinds of brand names depending on where you get that loan. They're available through the school, through nonprofit entities like VSAC, commercial banks, and even credit unions have them. Most of them require a cosigner, and that cosigner means that they are equally liable for the loan. So the loan is in the borrower, the student, and that cosigner's name. The cosigner agrees to make payments on the loan in the event the borrower is unable to. And in some cases, the cosigner's credit is used to support the loan, not the borrower. It is the cosigner in most cases. Non-federal loans are not equal, and that is what we're going to get into some of that tonight. Each lender sets their own terms and repayment options. They have different benefits on the loans. They have interest rates that vary. And the repayment options are different than the federal loans even. So be sure that you compare all of your options when looking at any of these non-federal education loans. You want to understand the cost of the loan and the terms of the loan. And it's really your choice to accept all or some of the loans offered on your award letter from your school. You can put some non-education loans in there if it is best for you.
So it sounds like Deb, there's a lot of different loan types out there. And families may see the federal loans right on their award letter, probably not the private loans. The federal direct loans, it sounds like for students, you always accept those first because they've got the best interest rates, they've got the best repayment terms, and they have some forgiveness provisions that come with those that should always be accepted if they're offered. However, if you're offered a plus loan or a private loan, you need to stop and really do your own research to figure out what's best for your family. So what else should a family be looking for if they're offered either the federal parent loan or a private loan?
Well, you're absolutely right. All of those things that you just said, you always take those federal student loans, both the subsidized and the unsubsidized first, because of the interest rate and because of the repayment options that the federal government does offer on those. You might have heard of some of them. There some repayments, some of the payments may be based on your income, which could help if your income is a little bit low. And there are options to defer the payments if you're having any kind of financial hardship. The other thing you should be looking for is, why are you looking particularly for a non-federal loan? Some of the reasons why you might want a loan of that type is if you have a cash flow, so that you're not going to have, perhaps you're not going to have problems making payments on that loan every month. But right now, to come up with $10,000, $20,000 to pay the school, that maybe you want to do that in a loan so that you're making monthly payments. Then you also have to think about, do you or can you make payments while the student is in school? And so you might then be looking at different repayment options that the lender would offer. And you also want to look at the least amount of, you may want to look at the least amount paid over the term of the loan. So you have to start thinking, what is it you're looking to do? And then you make your choices. You look at the lenders that you've done some research on, and you choose which to apply to and which to accept. You shop, you look at the terms, you look at the interest rates. Very important to look at those, because they will cost you some money if you're not clear on what is going to happen to your loan. You want to compare all of that to the Federal Plus loan and see what the interest rates are. Is it a fixed rate or a variable rate? And as you know, a variable rate, the payment may go up. Is the interest rate, how is the interest rate determined? Is it determined by a FICO score, or is it determined according to the repayment option that you select? There are many different ways that lenders set the interest rate. The fees on the loan are important to look at. It is very common to charge an origination fee on the loan once it disperses. But how that fee is calculated is what could be different. Some lenders do it according to the FICO score of the cosigner or the borrower in the case of a parent loan. Many different ways to calculate a fee on the loans. You also want to make sure that you understand if the fee is added to the loan amount or subtracted. The reason that that's important is that if the fee is deducted, you want to make sure that the requested amount you enter on that loan application is going to meet your net at the end, so that you don't have a couple $100s that you now have to come up with because the fee was deducted from the loan. You want to look at repayment options. When do the payments begin? Typically, they begin after the loan is fully dispersed, but they can begin once the student is less than half-time or withdrawn or graduated from the school. You can make deferment only payments on the loans, and that's where a lot of different lenders offer different repayment options. You want to be sure to look at those. You want to look at the monthly payment and how long you're going to pay on the loan. And another thing is, if you go back to school, if you take a break from school and then go back to school, or if you have any financial hardship, you want to make sure that you understand what the repayment is going to look like during those periods. One of the things that people forget to look at are the other benefits on the loans. There are incentives for paperless processing and online payments with some lenders. Cosigner release is a significant benefit that you might want to look at. Cosigner release means that once that loan has been in repayment for a period of time and it has been successfully repaid and is current, there often is an option to release the cosigner from the loan, and that means it comes off that person as a liability. It comes off the FICO, your credit report. which then in turn may make a change to your FICO. You also want to understand what happens to the loan if the borrower or the student dies or becomes disabled. You'll need to understand if that loan is still going to remain part of the estate and has to be repaid, or is the loan closed because either the borrower or the cosigner has become disabled.
Deb, we have a question that was just asked. Are VSAC loans, grants, scholarships, can they be used out of state?
Yes. Right now, grants for the state of Vermont are portable, which means that you can take your grant to another state. For Vermont residents, you can take them to another state. For the VSAC loans, you can also take them to another state. And I don't know if anybody is actually listening who is an out-of-stater coming into Vermont, you too can borrow from Vermont.
As long as they're attending a Vermont school?
As long as they're, yes, thank you. That's an important piece. This slide is comparing the interest rates, and it's more of a visual for everybody to see that a $15,000 loan paid over 15 years and the difference that an interest rate can make. That first bar is 4% loan, 4% interest rate on that $15,000 loan, and the total cost is almost $20,000. When you look at the 7%, that monthly payment has gone up a little bit, and the total cost of the loan has gone up $5,000. And then, of course, the 9% loan, that payment is even higher. And that total cost of $27,000 compared to the 4% at $20,000, there's a $7,000 difference there. And that's kind of a visual so that you can see how detailed some of these, the repayment options and the interest rates are on these loans.
So Deb, are there any pitfalls that families need to be aware of?
Yes, there are pitfalls. It is often that some lenders will offer to you an advertised low teaser interest rate. And you'll get something in the mail and it says student loan interest rates as low as 2.99%. Remember that you certainly can apply for that, but that doesn't mean that's the rate you're going to get. And the rate you get may be very unexpected for you. So generally, when we see that, the interest rate is determined on your FICO score. And you think that your FICO score is pretty good because you've been monitoring it on one of those websites. But in fact, there are hundreds of FICO scores and calculations. So the one that lender uses may not be the one that is being presented to you on those websites. It may be higher, it may be lower. And if the lender finds that your FICO, according to their calculation, is lower, your interest rate may be higher than you ever expected it would be. Be very careful about that. And the bottom line there is, if you don't get the rate that you expected, then stop processing the loan. Often the lender will have a cancel button on the application or a withdraw button or something that says, yeah, I don't want this loan. I don't agree with the terms. You can even call the lender and say, I started the application, but I don't like the terms on it, so please cancel it. You can look for a different loan and do your shopping. We call it shopping. You can go onto some student loan websites and actually shop, see what's out there for interest rates and the benefits and the repayment options.
Deb, I've got a couple more questions, if you don't mind if I break in, and I've got one for you and one for Greg. So the first one is, what is the current loan rate from VSAC, or does it depend on the amount you borrow?
The current rates with VSAC is determined according to the repayment option that you choose. So we have 3 different repayment options on the student loan, the student advantage loan, we call it. The immediate repayment option, where you start payment as soon as the loan is fully dispersed, within 45 days after the loan is fully dispersed. So in a typical academic year, that's going to be about February. That interest rate is 3.79%. There is an interest-only option where you pay only the interest on the loan until the student has left school. And that is 5.2%. And then there is a deferred repayment option. That interest rate is 6.1%. And those are all on our website if you want to go back and look all of those up.
Greg, the question for you, do we apply yearly for loans? And if a federal loan is taken out by the student, can payments be made prior to graduation?
So for federal loans, you in a way you apply yearly because you have to do the FAFSA every year in order to qualify for federal loans. However, the secondary paperwork, what we call the master promissory note, only has to be done once because it is a master promissory note. But you would have to do the FAFSA every year. With the majority of the private student loans, you do also apply yearly for those. There are a couple out on the market right now where you can do a 4-year, you can be pre-qualified for a 4-year loan, but the majority of loans you apply for yearly. The key with that is to really only apply for what you need, and then that way you know what the cost you actually need for the upcoming year and things like that. So if you're going to school and they promise you that they're going to keep the cost pretty stable, the 4-year option might be good. Otherwise, the yearly route, that way you can ensure you get the best interest rate and you're only applying for the loan amount that you need. Just so people know, as Deb was talking about the interest rates, I thought I'd look up the Federal Plus loan for next year. So there are no differences depending on how you repay the Federal Plus loan. Its interest rate is 6.28%. So if you're listening to all those rates that Deb just gave you, they all beat the standard Federal Plus loan of 6.28%.
And Greg, the other question for you was, if a federal loan is taken out by the student, can payments be made prior to graduation?
So the federal loans, students are automatically put into what's called an in-school deferment. So as long as the students enrolled, the lender, what we more call nowadays the servicer, the federal government has a number of servicers that process their loans. We'll put them in a deferment status. They'll always take money. So what'll happen is the school will disperse the loans sometime in the beginning of the student's first semester. When that happens, they'll be assigned a servicer. The servicing agency will reach out to the student. They'll be told their information. They can sign up for an account at that point in time. And if they wanted to send $20 here, $40 there, the lender will take the money, but they will be placed in what's called an in-school deferment status.
Perfect. Thank you both very much. And Deb, I'm sorry to have interrupted you mid-slide.
No, that's perfect. The next slide is basically going over a lot of what we just talked about with that little discussion that we had. Minimizing your education debt. Don't borrow 100%. And Greg was just speaking of that. Borrow only what you need. Take your free aid first. So once you do your FAFSA, the school is going to get a report. They're going to find out if you are eligible for a Pell Grant, or in the state of Vermont, a VSAC, I should call it a Vermont grant. Any scholarships that you have, anything that is free, go after that money first, because it minimizes what you need to borrow. The other thing is any expenses that you have to go to school, like getting your books. Get used books. There are books that you can get now online. You actually go to a website, the school even gives it to you. They have a website, you can go and order your books. They're all used books, get them that way. Get your laundry detergent on sale at a store. Use your coupons. Don't get it at the bookstore because you know you're going to pay a premium price if you do that. Remember to stop the application if it isn't what you expected for interest rate or the terms aren't what you expect. Just because you started it doesn't mean you have to continue with it. If you don't like it, stop. Compare your loan options before you're signing. What is it that you need the loan to do for you? What are the interest rates, the fees, the benefits? Once you do have a loan and you go into repayment, remember that if you have trouble with your payment, contact your lender or your servicer. because they're there to help you. They have tools to help you with those repayment. The other thing that VSAC wants you to do is call us. If you can't get through to your servicer or your lender that you have, VSAC is more than happy to walk you through some of the points and maybe help you get to the person that you need to get to in order to get back and make some payments on that. We have loan coaches at VSAC, and they offer the advice and help you walk through this. So if you can't get through to the lender or a servicer, or if you don't understand what they're saying, call us. We'd be happy to help, even if the loan isn't with us. Remember to reduce the overall cost of the loan by paying interest while you're in school if you can, or pay more than your monthly payment once you are in full repayment. One of the other things, and I will tell you, this is what I do with our student loans for our children. I make 2 payments a month. And by doing that, I'm incrementally reducing the interest that I'm paying on the loans. And remember that you're in control. Take those federal student loans, that's the student federal loans, the sub and the unsub, and then determine what else you need for loans and what you need those loans to do for you. And shop and stop if you don't like what you're seeing for rates and repayment.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful. Greg, from the school perspective, are there additional things that you see that families can do to help cut down on what the student needs to borrow?
So we'll talk about that, but yeah, definitely the do your homework, shop for the proper interest rates, get the best deal that you can, maximize the amount of free money that you'll be eligible for. So outside scholarships, I had my 18-year-old, I think, applying for every scholarship that existed through his high school and other civic organizations and things like that. You know, and you'd be surprised what's out there. So definitely do some quick research, do online searches. You can find a lot more than you think would be out there. And be fiscally sound. I can't think of the right word. My apologies. Just in the sense of live like a college student now, so you don't have to live like a college student once you get out of school. That's one of my favorite savings. What I heard when I was getting out, just in the sense of be smart, save your money, don't go crazy buying a lot of stuff because you'll be paying for it for a long time.
Great advice. Deb, there's one more question I'd like to ask, if you don't mind me breaking in. Is there a certain date by which my student must take out a VSAC loan, or can he initiate the process at any time during the school year? Anytime
during the school year. Just be mindful that your school may have a date that bill needs to be satisfied. And often if the student hasn't applied fully for a loan and it's not ready to disperse, often the schools may speak to you about that. We have also found in some of the work that we do at VSAC that if the loan is in process and perhaps it's just hit the school's side, sometimes the schools will say, yep, we got it. We know that you're good for this. We're going to let you go through and register for your classes or whatever. But typically schools want that bill satisfied in order to get on the campus and start your work. If that's not the case, if you find that in fact you believe you have everything all set up and something goes awry, you didn't end up getting the scholarship you thought you were going to or whatever, and you feel that you need a little more money or your housing expenses went up, whatever the case, you can apply for a VSAC loan anytime through that semester, that loan period, all the way through to 30 days after the loan period or after you have ceased enrollment or less than half time. So there is that little bit at the end that if you're done school, you got to have it done with the loan application done within 30 days. But any time is basically good.
Yeah, everything Deb was just talking about is accurate. I would just stress the school, make sure you're working with your school and you're following your school's deadlines. Here at Champlain College, yeah, definitely. We'll have a billing due date. It's typically a couple weeks before classes start. As long as we see that you're working on the loan and we get the approval before the first day of classes, you know, there won't be any issues. Most schools wait until after classes to even do the first disbursement because we want to confirm that you're actually attending classes. You know, so there's always a little bit of wiggle room. You know, and if something happens and you get charged a late fee, call your school, see if they can waive it. You know, prove to them that you were working on the loan before the due date, and a lot of times that they may be willing to waive that late fee. And one of the good things is a lot of times you apply for the loan for the entire year. So once you're set and ready to go, you don't have to worry about the spring semester bill because you know you've already gotten it approved for that and everything's all settled.
Perfect, thank you. So Greg, let's talk about a situation that you might see in your office on a daily basis and how you would advise this family. So I'm just going to describe a typical Vermont family to you and let you come back and tell us how you would talk to this group. So we have a married couple. They have 2 children. Their oldest son, Sam, is looking at Champlain for this fall. Sam's parents both work. His dad, Scott, teaches math at an Addison County high school, and his mom, Martha, is an ER nurse at Porter Hospital. They've received an award letter for Sam, and they are meeting with you to make sure they understand what they've been offered and to ask what options you have to help them come up with the difference between what they received and the cost of Sam's freshman year.
Sure.
Where do you start?
Yep. Good news is as of July 6th, Champlain College campus will be open, and we're actually already taking visitors now. So this will be happening in person. When we did this webinar last year, we were, you know, unfortunately campus was closed. So I'm excited to be able to meet with families again and have these conversations because I think they're very important. So I like simple math, so I'm going to make these numbers easy for me. So we're going to talk in this scenario, we're going to use tuition fees of $20,000 and room and board of $10,000. So your total, what we refer to as billed charges, is going to be $30,000. The student has received grants and scholarships of $15,000, federal student loans of $5,500. This is what we call the annual loan limit. This is the maximum a first-year student would be eligible for. So it leaves their unmet costs at $9,500. So the first thing I like to talk to with families is to review the award letter, and what you'll also hear referred to now is the financial aid offer letter. And to make sure they understand every aspect of it. Most financial aid offer letters now will break it out into sections so you clearly know what type of aid it is. The first section is usually what we refer to as the free money. This is the federal and state grants if you qualify. So typically based off of the FAFSA and then the state application, you'll receive indication of what you're receiving in the federal Pell Grant, federal SEOG grant, and here in Vermont, what we often refer to as the VSAC grant. You'll also be notified of your institutional scholarships and grants. The difference between these are just merit-based and need-based. Need-based are usually referred to as grants. Merit-based are your scholarships. Merit-based can look at a number of things, typically your academic record, clubs and associations you were part of, and you know anything that the school chooses to look at can be part of the merit. Need-based is typically off of the FAFSA form as well. Some schools will also use the FAFSA, I should say, is the free application for federal student aid. One thing you'll probably often see financial aid people talk about is acronyms, and you should always stop your financial aid counselor and ask them to explain that acronym. We sometimes forget to do that. So the free application for federal student aid is for all federal aid. Some schools also have what's called the CSS profile. That's just an extra form to help them get a better idea of what your need-based eligibility would be. And then the last group of free money is the outside scholarships that we've talked about a little bit. So high schools typically offer some what we call honor night awards, outside associations, things like Rotaries, libraries, anything in the local town or the city will offer outside scholarships. And then anything from small groups to large groups, you know, the American Cancer Society, things like that. There's lots of outside scholarships out there. I did notice when the questions come through, you know, can I make a recommendation? We get that typically comes up when we start talking with families is can we make recommendations? As that individual, it seems like they've already discovered there's lots of different routes you can go to try and find some outside scholarships. I remember back in the Stone Ages when I was applying, you went to the library and you found those old books that were about this thick to try and find scholarships you qualified for. There are search engines now, so they've made it a lot better. And what I always advise families is there's free search engines out there. So there's no reason to go out there and pay $75 and to pay $100. What you want to do is you want to do your research to find out how do they make it free? Because typically what's going to happen is they're going to take some of the information you provide and sell it. So I say, don't, give them income information, don't give them a ton of stuff. But if you're willing to sit there and have a bunch of mailers be sent to you about people who want to offer you things because you have a college age student, that's fine to send them the address information. What I did is I set up a dummy Gmail account, and then that way all the email was going to this just Gmail account that I only had to monitor, infrequently to make sure I was getting the things that I needed. But the outside scholarships, definitely find a couple search engines, do a couple of minimum stuff. The nice thing is you type in what the major is, you type in where you're looking for geographic ranges, type in things specific about the student, and then the search engines will give you a lot of good and unique information. Also,
Greg, if you don't mind, I just want to add to the other thing that all Vermonters should do is you should check the VSAC scholarship booklet. VSAC administers over 160 different scholarships worth about $6.1 million. So that's a place you don't have to worry about scams. We've vetted those organizations that we are working with. We've vetted that their funds are available. So you should always start there. And one of the things that we always tell families is that the closer you are to home, the more competitive you are. So competing in your own high school, you're competing against the other seniors, but that's the entire pool of what you're competing against. In your community, you may be competing against former high school graduates plus your class. When you get to VSAC, you're frequently competing at a state level. Vermont's not that big of a state, but you are competing at a state level. When you do the things that Greg is suggesting, which are excellent ideas, you are at that point competing nationally. And so they get more and more competitive as you go along, which was one of the things that Greg was saying just a moment ago. These are competitive awards.
So, and the other good group that usually can do some vetting for you is your high school guidance office, depending on the platform they use. Like my son's schools use Naviance. And so a lot of times they'll put some scholarship information through there as well. Naviance does the vetting for them, and then the scholarship information is right there on the student's portal. So depending on what portal your high school is using, you might be able to see some additional information there. But yes, highly, anyone looking at VSAC, anyone from the state of Vermont, definitely go out to the VSAC website. And it's the first place I sent my son to fill out all the information. So, and a good thing with that as well is a lot of them, he fills out one application, one essay, and it works for multiple of the scholarship opportunities. So it's not like you're having to reapply for each one of those scholarships.
Greg, someone is wondering if when you have a moment, you could put the link to the scholarship site that you used in the chat.
So I just sent him to the VSAC. So I don't know if you have the link to the VSAC one. I don't know if I would necessarily use the other ones because they're third parties, but we can talk about it and possibly put it up after the link from the webinar.
Absolutely, we can add it with the information we send out at the end of this evening. Perfect solution.
So the next thing you'll see on the award letter, the offer letter, typically is the money you have to pay back after graduation or after the student withdraws. And so these are your loans. Schools will always, well, I shouldn't say always, but schools will typically show you what the student is eligible for at that $5,500 I mentioned for a first-year student. You'll see referred to as a federal direct loan, typically subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized means the government's paying the interest while the student's enrolled, and that's just again tied to that FAFSA. It's a need-based loan. And the unsubsidized just means that the interest is occurring while the student enrolls. Depending on the institution, they will sometimes show the eligibility for the federal plus loan. Here at Champlain College, we just show it as a plus loan eligibility because we want you to know that you can borrow a plus loan, but we don't set it up. We don't show it. We don't say that this is something you have to borrow. Some schools don't put it on at all. We just like to make sure you understand that there is that option to borrow the federal parent plus loan. Then they're all private. There are the private alternative loans, the private student loans. Typically it's in the student name as Deb mentioned, and the parent is a cosigner. There are some out there now where the parent is the borrower. And we're starting to see that more and more. VSAC does have that option as well, where the parent can be the straight borrower. Typically schools won't show one of those because you're going out and you're doing the research as the borrower. You're going to pick the loan, you're going to pick the lender. But once you get qualified for the loan, we have to certify your eligibility for it. And at that point in time, you will see it on the award letter. So at that point in time, once you see it on the student's age screen or you get a revised offer letter and you see that way, you'll know that it's good to go. The school has certified your eligibility, and once classes begin, the loan funds will be dispersed. Something that was happening a little bit more just before the pandemic came in were things called income share agreements. They work a lot like a loan in the sense that you agree to repay a certain amount based off of your income after graduation and how much you have borrowed. But the funding source is a little bit differently. Typically, the school is acting as the servicer and they've raised some funds to offer these agreements. It's kind of stayed quiet since the pandemic, but it'll be interesting for us to see if these start to pick up. Some schools just do them for what we call like emergency loans. So the student has a situation and they need a quick $500. The school will give them through these income share agreements because that way they're a little bit less of a risk for the student and a risk for the school as well. And the last thing that I always point out to families is what I always call the pizza money. It's the federal work study, the student employment. You'll often see those things referred to depending on the school and the institution. Federal work study, again, is need-based. It's dependent on what the information we receive from the FAFSA, and it's funded by the federal government. Student employment is our same thing. They're jobs that are on campus. It's just funded through the institution, and there isn't the requirement of need-based eligibility. These typically are on-campus positions, although there are more and more that are out in the community. We have some that work in the library, some that work in the Boys and Girls Club. So it's great to get the students out in the community and helping our neighbors and colleagues. It's just like any other job. Student works 6 hours a week. They get paid bi-weekly here at Champlain College. And I always say to the student, that's the money so you can go downtown to Church Street and you can get a slice of pizza. That's the money so you can go to Ben & Jerry's and get some ice cream. The diligent students will save it up, and that's what they'll use to pay for their books for the next semester. And one thing that popped to my mind as Deb was talking about books and things like that and how to minimize your costs, the new thing, and don't let my bookstore let you know that I'm telling you about this, but they do offer it. The big thing now is renting books. So if you're taking those non-major books, so the courses that you don't think are going to stay with you your entire life, a lot of times you can rent them now just for the semester. You give them back. It's a lot cheaper than buying the books for in perpetuity and moving this box around from the place you go to the place you go. So that's an option to remember as well, as to rent your books. So at this point in time, we've gone through the award letter. We've talked about the free money. We've talked about the loans, the money you have to pay back. And then we talk about the student employment piece. One thing to remember about the student employment piece is because it's a paycheck, it's not coming off of the bill. It's money the student's actually going to be receiving while they're on campus. So it's not going to be deducted from those billed charges. So the next thing we talk about is what you're going to see when that bill comes. And it looked like for some of you have started to receive those fall billing statements. So again, the first thing you see is the tuition and fees, what we call the billed charges. And in our scenario, we were showing $30,000 in billed charges. Take out that free money, the grants and scholarships, we had $15,000, so it's leaving $15,000. So that's $15,000 of billed charges. Remember though, there's things that we call unmet need, unmet costs. Deb had mentioned one of them, books. You're gonna have to pay for books in some form. Supplies, laundry detergent, clothes, bedding. You're gonna set up a second room somewhere else. There's gonna be additional costs for supplies. The student's gonna have to get back and forth on campus. We say at least eight times in the year, because beginning of the semester, end of the semester, then those breaks in between. Budget for travel, if your son or daughter is going to school in Vermont, it's a little bit better. If you have a son like mine who wants to go to Pennsylvania, he's traveling 10 hours away. So there's a little bit more extra expense in those things. Those are charges you have to account for and you have to think about when you're factoring in your overall costs. The one thing you'll notice a lot of times is the financial aid award offer is higher than your bill charges. And that's because we can give financial aid up to your cost of attendance. So we can award financial aid to help you with books, to help you purchase supplies, to help you with travel components. So that a lot of times is the first thing that when I'm talking with families, they sit and say, wait a second, you offered in this family situation that $30,000 in billed charges. I might have given them $35,000 in aid eligibility and they want to know why. And that's because we can help you fund things like the books, the unbilled charges, stuff like that. So in our scenario, we showed $5,500 in student loans. So that left that unmet cost of $9,500. That typically then takes up the rest of the conversation. How can the family meet those unmet costs? So it comes down to the conversation with the family. What were they? I start off with what were you anticipating being able to pay? what is your personal contribution? Now more and more families have a 529 plan, and that's one of those plans where you've been putting money away, typically since the student's been born or since they were young, and it's going into, here in Vermont, VSAC administers the account, and then once they're set to school, you can withdraw money for educationally related costs. So that's a great way. The money's been sitting there making interest. There's tax benefits to it going into the account plan, and this way you have access to funds. Deb mentioned a little bit as well, in the sense that you may know that you have $500 a month that you can help towards your kid's education. So you have to decide, are you going to be making a payment plan of $500 a month, or are you going to go to taking out a larger loan that you can use that $500 a month to help pay those monthly costs? Next thing are the federal student loans that we've talked about. And then it is that conversation of the parent plus loan versus the private alternative loan that spent the majority of time at the beginning of this webinar talking about. You have to weigh those pros and cons, weigh the interest rates, weigh the repayment benefits, consider the fees, consider consider all those different types of things, and decide what's the best option for the family. I have other on here. When I first started this, one other big option families use a lot of times were home equity loans. They're not as common as they once were, but that is always something to remember. You can use the saved value of your home to fund your education. Pros and cons. I always tell people I'm not a tax expert and I'm not a finance guy. I let you know it's an option. You should probably have a conversation with your tax accountant or somebody else to make sure you're doing the best option for you. But I do like to put it out there. The other grandparents, anyone else you may know about that's going to help the son or daughter. I don't know that. So I try and get as much information from the family as I can. And then we try and figure out, a lot of times we're mixing the options, which works best for the family. So it might be that they're going to pay $250 straight to the school, and then they're going to take out a loan for the rest of it and use that $250 to help with the monthly payment of the loan. So that's what we get down to. And the other thing I like to remember to remind them of is this isn't a 1-year situation typically. If it's an associate's degree, it's 2 years. If it's a bachelor's degree, it's typically 4 years. So a lot of times, more and more often, I'm working with a family and I'm showing them a 4-year projection, just so they can have a really good understanding of what the costs are going to be and how to maximize, what they have to make sure they're borrowing the least amount that they need to.
All right. So are there any other questions that folks would like to ask while we're all together? And I think there is one. Hold on one second. The Vermont 529 plan mentions a $10,000 maximum withdrawal per year before some kind of tax applies. Can you explain this?
This seems odd to me.
Yeah, I do not know what that reference is, and I am pretty familiar with Vermont's 529 plans. We have families that frequently withdraw more than $10,000 per year to pay for higher education. So let me do some research, and if you send that question to info@vsac.org, I'll be happy to write back to you directly so we can respond to that. Deb and Greg, is there anything else you'd like to add? We are almost out of time, but if there's any other points you'd like to make, now is a great time to do that.
I think that we should make sure that people reference the VSAC website. There is a ton of information out there. We touched upon the scholarships and how to look for scholarships. Marilyn commented about the scholarship booklet. That booklet is online and you can download it from online. So you don't even need to wait for the mail to arrive, whatever, but it's decent sized, but that booklet is on the website. And again, there's information about grants and loans and whatever out there, a great resource. So on this screen here, we do have the info@vsac.org website, email address, I should say, and you can send any questions to that, and we triage to understand which department should answer that. So you can send anything to us that way. The phone number listed there, 800-226-1029, is to the area that I manage, the private loan originations. So if you have questions about originating loans, we've got a staff of 6 of us who have been there quite some time, and we are very seasoned with this. So we'd be happy to chat with you. And that's my personal email address at work. So you're certainly welcome to email me there.
Deb, we have a question that's come in. How long does it take to do the loan process? And I'm thinking probably both you and Greg need to answer this, because there's an answer for how long it takes to do the private loan process and a different answer for how long it takes to do the federal loan process. So
yeah, I'll take the private loan. For VSAC's process, it can take you, I'm going to say, a total of 6 hours for total approval all the way through to the school. That is the best case scenario, and that is when your school is working with us electronically, and the school is pulling in those requests on a routine basis throughout the day. For a student, borrower, and a cosigner, I worked with a customer the other day, and I was on the phone with him for, I'm going to say 20 minutes tops. And that was walking him through step by step by step. And it was a very specific situation I was working with him on. So 20 minutes tops. If you're not computer savvy, it may take you a little bit longer, because of course you have to, electronically sign the credit agreement, so on and so forth. But 20 minutes tops, 40 minutes to get through the application. And again, it goes right through. It tells you if you're approved for credit immediately. And if you are, and you continue with the e-signatures, that request is going right to the school at that time. And hopefully it comes back the same day.
we can be very quick on those private loans. The thing that's happened already, though, is that hopefully these families have all completed that FAFSA and the Vermont Grant app. So there's that piece, which I think Greg's going to answer when he talks about the federal loan. So Greg, I'll let you answer that, and then I've got another question that's come in.
Yep, and so what Marilyn was just talking about is to apply for the Parent Plus loan, you're going to need to use that FSA ID that you created to sign the FAFSA. So you'll go into the federal site, you'll use your FSA ID. There's 2 steps to getting a Plus loan. The first is the loan application. You'll complete that, and it can be as soon as, I think, within 5 minutes you can get an approval from the Department of Education, because they're not looking at as much credit standards as your typical private student loan will. If you are approved for the loan, you will need to then do what's called the Master Promissory Note for the Parent Plus loan. If for some reason you may be initially denied for the Parent Plus loan, you can get a cosigner, or you can have the decision be appealed. That can take longer because you're typically sending information back and forth with the federal government. But for the majority of our loans, I tell families, give it 24 hours. So if you're going to apply for the loan at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, we should be able to certify the loan by Wednesday afternoon.
So the next question we got is, and again, I think I need you both to answer this. Can parents who are currently in repayment of their own school loans borrow for their kids?
For a private loan, yes, absolutely. No question about that.
So that would be one of the things the federal government will be looking at is if you are in default on one of your own federal loans, that would cause issues for you to be able to borrow for your son or daughter with a federal Parent Plus loan. But if you're in good repayment status, there'd be no issue for you to borrow.
Ditto what he said. I should have included that. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, so you're going to look at their credit score, Deb, and if their credit score is low because they've been not making regular payments or whatever reason their credit score is low, that would be a problem. But the fact that they are paying loans does not prevent them from taking out additional loans for their students.
That's correct, yes.
All right.
And I'll just let people know that that is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me, even if you're not looking at Champlain College. I always love helping families in any way that I can, helping secure their son or daughter's education. Like Marilyn mentioned, I went through it this year, so it really opened my eyes sitting on the other side of the seat. So by all means, reach out to me and I'll do the best that I can.
We'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. We will be sending out a recording of this following tonight, so you'll have that probably sometime tomorrow. And as both Greg and Deborah have very graciously offered, you have their contact information. If you have questions, you know, you've got a direct line right into two of the best experts in the state of Vermont on higher education finance and college financial aid. And I strongly encourage you, reach right out to them if you have questions.